Rosé is often described as the soft voice of Blackpink, the one whose tone carries emotion, sometimes so delicate that it feels as if every note holds a memory. But behind that gentle image is a story that started long before the lights, the tours, and the millions of fans who now know her name. Long before any of that, Rosé was simply a teenager sitting in a quiet house in Melbourne, playing the piano late at night while the rest of the world slept. Her real name is Park Chae-young. She was born in Auckland, New Zealand, to South Korean parents who had moved abroad in search of better opportunities. When she was still very young, the family relocated again, this time to Australia, settling in Melbourne. That move would quietly shape the path her life would eventually take. Growing up there meant living between two cultures. Inside the house, Korean language and traditions were part of daily life. Outside, everything was Australian. School, friends, music on the radio, and the rhythm of a completely different world. That mix would later influence the way she approached music and identity. But the most important part of her childhood had nothing to do with fame or performance. It was simply music. Rosé spent countless hours learning instruments and exploring melodies. She played the piano. She taught herself guitar. She sang in church choirs, discovering how much emotion a voice could carry when it met the right song. Those early years were often quiet. In interviews, Rosé has mentioned that she spent a lot of time alone. Her parents worked long hours, her sister focused on school, and many of her classmates lived far away. Instead of busy afternoons filled with activities, she found herself returning again and again to the same place, the piano. It became her escape. She could sit there for hours, repeating melodies, adjusting chords, experimenting with the sound of her own voice, sometimes late into the evening, long after everyone else had gone to bed. At that time, there were no cameras recording her, no auditions waiting, no global audience listening. Just a teenager in Melbourne slowly realizing that music was not just something she enjoyed, it was something she needed. And without knowing it yet, those quiet nights in Australia were preparing her for a moment that would change everything. A single opportunity that would take her thousands of kilometers away from home and into one of the most demanding music industries in the world. The turning point in Rosé's life began with something that almost felt accidental. In 2012, her father heard that YG Entertainment was holding global auditions in Sydney. At the time, YG was already one of the most powerful companies in the K-pop industry, known for launching artists like Big Bang and shaping the sound of modern Korean pop music. For most teenagers living in Australia, the idea of auditioning for a Korean entertainment company felt distant, almost unrealistic. The K-pop industry was thousands of kilometers away, and the competition was known to be intense. When her father suggested that she should try, Rosé reportedly laughed at the idea. She had never trained professionally. She had never imagined herself competing against hundreds of aspiring singers. To her, music was still something personal, something she practiced quietly at home. But her father saw something different. For years, he had watched her sit at the piano, sing late into the night, and lose herself completely in music. To him, the audition was not just a gamble. It was a chance she might regret missing. Eventually, Rosé agreed to go. She traveled from Melbourne to Sydney for the audition. The room was filled with young hopefuls, each carrying the same dream of entering the Korean music industry. According to several reports, around 700 contestants were present that day. Only one would leave ranked first. When Rosé stepped onto the stage, there were no elaborate visuals, no complex choreography, nothing designed to impress through spectacle. There was only her voice, and almost immediately, it stood out. By the end of the audition, the results surprised many people in the room. The quiet teenager from Melbourne had finished first among hundreds of contestants. Within a short time, she received an offer that would completely reshape her future, a trainee contract with YG Entertainment in South Korea. Accepting it meant making a decision few teenagers would be ready for. It meant leaving Australia, leaving her family, leaving the life she had always known. For someone who had grown up far from the Korean entertainment system, the choice was daunting. But the opportunity was impossible to ignore. So Rosé packed her bags and moved to Seoul. What waited for her there was not fame, not luxury, and certainly not the glamorous world many people imagine when they think of K-pop. Instead, she was about to enter one of the most demanding training systems in the global music industry. When Rosé arrived in Seoul, the reality of the K-pop trainee system quickly became clear. Joining YG Entertainment did not mean stepping into a music school. It meant entering a system that functioned more like a long and uncertain competition. Dozens of trainees practiced every day, all chasing the same goal. Only a small number would eventually debut. Some would spend years training before quietly disappearing from the program when the company changed its plans. For Rosé, everything felt new. She had grown up in Australia, far from the strict structure of the Korean idol industry. Suddenly, her days were filled with vocal lessons, dance rehearsals, language training, and constant evaluations. Every performance mattered. Every mistake could determine whether she stayed or was replaced. The pressure was intense, but inside the company, something quickly became obvious to the producers. Her voice stood out. It was not only technically strong, it carried a tone that listeners could immediately recognize. Slightly husky, emotional, and capable of turning simple melodies into something deeply expressive. Even during her trainee period, that quality began attracting attention inside the studio. Then, less than a year after she joined the company, an unexpected opportunity appeared. Rosé was invited to record vocals for a track by G-Dragon, one of the biggest stars under the YG label. The song was called Without You. But when the track was released, there was a surprising detail. Her name did not appear. Listeners could clearly hear the female voice throughout the song, emotional and distinctive, yet the identity of the singer remained hidden. At the time, Rosé was still only a trainee, far from any official debut. For most people listening to the song back then, that voice belonged to a complete mystery. Only years later would fans realize that the unknown singer on that track was the future main vocalist of Blackpink. Despite that early moment in the spotlight, Rosé's journey was far from over. She continued training for nearly 4 years. 4 years of rehearsals, evaluations, and uncertainty. In the K-pop industry, even talented trainees can disappear before debut if the company decides to change direction. But in the summer of 2016, something finally began to change. YG Entertainment started revealing the members of a new girl group that fans had been anticipating for years. One by one, the members were introduced. Rosé would be the last, and soon, the world would hear her voice in a completely different way. In August 2016, the long wait finally came to an end. Blackpink officially debuted under YG Entertainment with their first single album, Square One. The 2 tracks released almost simultaneously, Whistle and Boombaya, immediately caught the attention of the Korean music industry. From the very first performances, the group felt different. Each member brought a distinct presence to the stage. There was sharp charisma, powerful rap energy, and a visual impact that quickly drew fans in. But Rosé stood out in a more subtle way. Her voice. When the chorus arrived in songs like Whistle, her tone cut through the production with a sound that was difficult to mistake for anyone else. It carried both strength and vulnerability at the same time. A slightly raspy texture that added emotion to every line she sang. For many listeners, that voice quickly became one of the defining elements of Blackpink's sound. And the group's rise happened fast. Within only a few years, Blackpink had moved far beyond the Korean market. Their music videos were collecting hundreds of millions of views. Their songs dominated streaming platforms, and their concerts were attracting massive international crowds. K-pop was no longer confined to one region of the world. Blackpink was helping turn it into a global phenomenon. One of the most symbolic moments of that rise came when the group performed at the Coachella Valley Music and Arts Festival in the United States. Appearing on that stage placed them in front of a completely different audience and confirmed that K-pop had become part of mainstream global pop culture. For Rosé, the transformation was extraordinary. The teenager who once practiced music quietly in Melbourne was now standing in front of enormous crowds around the world. Her voice, once heard only by family members and small church audiences, was now reaching millions of listeners across continents. Yet despite the scale of that success, Rosé often appeared different from the typical image of a global pop star. In interviews and variety shows, she came across as thoughtful and reserved. Fans often described her as down-to-earth, someone who seemed more interested in talking about music than about celebrity. But while the group's global fame continued to grow, another moment was quietly approaching. Because after years of success with Blackpink, Rosé was about to step onto the stage alone. By the time Blackpink had become a global phenomenon, one question kept appearing among fans: when would Rosé finally release her own music? For years, listeners had heard her voice in the group's biggest songs, but many believed there was still another side of her artistry waiting to be revealed. Behind the scenes, Rosé was known for spending long hours writing, playing guitar, and experimenting with melodies. The expectation for a solo project slowly grew stronger. Then, in March 2021, it finally happened. Rosé released her first solo single album, R. The project contained 2 songs, but one immediately captured global attention: On the Ground. The music video exploded online. Within 24 hours, it broke several records for a Korean solo artist, collecting tens of millions of views almost instantly. The song quickly climbed international charts, including the rankings of the Billboard Global charts. For Rosé, the release carried a personal meaning. On the Ground was not just a pop song designed for commercial success. The lyrics reflected a thought she had been exploring for years: the strange feeling of chasing success, only to realize that the most important things in life were always close to you. In interviews, she explained that the title referred to a simple idea: that everything she truly needed in life had always been on the ground. The ordinary moments with people she loved, the act of making music, and the reminder that fame does not replace the basic things that make life meaningful. Shortly after, listeners discovered the second track from the project, Gone. Where On the Ground carried a large pop production, Gone moved in a different direction. The song highlighted the emotional texture of Rosé's voice, the same quality that had first caught the attention of producers during her trainee years. But as often happens in the world of K-pop, even successful releases can create tension among fans. Online discussions began appearing in different parts of the fandom. Some fans questioned why Rosé had received a solo project, while another member of the group, Jisoo, had not yet debuted solo at that time. Most observers understood that such decisions are made by the company rather than the artists themselves. Still, the debate revealed how intense expectations can become inside one of the world's largest pop fandoms. Through it all, Rosé maintained the same approach she had shown since the beginning of her career. She stayed focused on the one thing that had always defined her: the music. And as her solo era unfolded, another transformation was quietly happening. Rosé was no longer only known as the voice of Blackpink. She was becoming something larger, a global figure whose influence extended far beyond the music industry. As Rosé's solo era continued to grow, her influence began expanding far beyond music. She was no longer known only as the main vocalist of Blackpink. Increasingly, she was appearing in spaces that connected music, fashion, and global culture. Luxury brands quickly recognized that influence. Rosé became a global ambassador for Saint Laurent, a partnership that attracted major attention in the fashion world. Not long after, she was also named global ambassador for Tiffany & Company, appearing in international campaigns and high-profile events. These collaborations were more than simple endorsements. In the fashion industry, Rosé's presence began carrying measurable impact. A single appearance or social media post could generate millions of dollars in media value for the brands she represented. Her visibility soon extended to some of the most prominent cultural events in the world. In 2021, she attended the Met Gala, becoming one of the first female K-pop idols to walk that red carpet. The moment symbolized how far K-pop had moved into the global cultural conversation. Later, another event captured international attention. The members of Blackpink were invited to Buckingham Palace, where they were received by King Charles III during a ceremony recognizing cultural influence and global outreach. It was a striking image. Artists who had started their careers in the Korean music industry were now being welcomed in one of the most symbolic institutions in the United Kingdom. For Rosé, moments like that reflected how far her journey had taken her. Yet despite the scale of her fame, many fans still point to the same quality they noticed years earlier: a certain softness. In interviews, Rosé has openly spoken about the pressure that comes with performing on the world stage. She has admitted that confidence is something she continues to work on, even after reaching the kind of success most artists only imagine. That honesty may be part of the reason her voice resonates with so many listeners. Because when Rosé sings, it rarely feels like someone trying to impress an audience. It feels like someone sharing something real. From a teenager playing piano late at night in Melbourne to one of the most recognizable voices in global pop music, her journey has never really followed the path people might expect from fame. For Rosé, it always begins in the same place, with the music.